and thank you all for inviting me here tonight. When I get home this evening, I'll get caught up with my wife, who was at the Supreme Court this morning.
Oh.
And I would have been at her side, except for this commitment, which I was not about to break, because I look forward to these engagements. And so at least our family was part of whatever history occurred today, and I look forward to hearing the full report. It's really critical, ladies and gentlemen, in my judgment, that Americans from all walks of life pay particular attention to the decisions that are coming from the federal government or the non-decisions that are coming from the federal government, because we are at a critical juncture in the history of this nation, in my view, that we are on a path that we simply cannot sustain in this nation. And the only way to change the path is if the citizens of this country take ownership, take responsibility, and do what is in their self-interest, rather than simply tolerating elected representatives doing what is in their self-interest. Because the two are not aligned. Why do I say this? For 3 years in a row, 2010, 2011, and 2012, the very same phenomenon has impacted every citizen in this country to their detriment. And it's going to happen again next year if we keep doing what we're doing today. And what I'm referring to, ladies and gentlemen, is that every time in the last 3 years that this nation's economic engine has gotten to the level of at least 3% growth, we see a dramatic rise in the crude oil price. And that dramatic rise in the crude oil price is met with all kinds of hullabaloo by elected officials who end up doing nothing other than wait for the economy to sag because of the high crude oil prices and the high gasoline prices and diesel prices, which affects every citizen in this country, not only when they buy the fuel, but everything else that they purchase that has an add-on cost to pay for the fuel. And the economy slows, the stock market staggers, joblessness continues until the crude oil price declines. Guess what's happening now? Crude oil price is declining. And that decline in the crude oil price enables the core economy to recover a bit, meaning that consumers have a little more money in their pocket. So consumers can go spend some additional disposable income on discretionary items that they might want, which is where the growth in the economy comes from, until the growth achieves the 3% level. And then we go right back into the same pattern as we came out of. The leadership of this nation at the federal level has failed the American people literally for decades, but most noticeably in the last decade, because of its unwillingness and inability to come together on solutions that are good for America, solutions that ultimately would also be good for the world. What am I referring to? Well, let me tell the story of a conversation I had with Senator Obama when he was running for office in July 2007. I met him at an event in St. Louis. Because of a contribution that had been made to his campaign, I was allotted 30 minutes to talk to him about energy issues as I saw them. Now, I'm a registered Democrat, but I've been talking to Rudy Giuliani, Mike Huckabee, during my tenure as Shell president, and Hillary Clinton, and so I was trying in a nonpartisan way to talk to all the major contenders in the 2008 election, because what was happening in 2005, 6, and 7 was a dramatic rise in the crude oil price. And with hearing after hearing, I did 6 hearings in 18 months to try to explain the high oil price and the law of supply and demand. But instead was, the stripes on my back from the insults and the pejoratives were starting to smart. So get into the process. Go talk to these people. Not knowing who might win, talk to as many as would talk to you. And so this hot summer evening in St. Louis, after his remarks, I said to Senator Obama, we're due to speak. He said, yes. I said, we have a room in this person's house. He said, yeah, but why don't we just stand right here? I'm running a little late, and I don't have a lot of time. So I said, okay. So instead of a private room and 30 minutes, we were surrounded by 15 people who wanted to hear, what's the senator talking about with this guy? So he said, what's up? I said, well, Senator, I want to talk to you about your energy policy that's on your website and describes your agenda for your campaign. I'm very worried about it because it has not a single word about increasing the amount of hydrocarbon and the energy content going forward. In other words, there's nothing in there about more access to more oil and natural gas, more drilling for oil and natural gas. And I'm very worried that if you win this presidency, that if you don't have a robust agenda for your first 4 years, my concern is that while you don't have any accountability for the current gasoline price, which has risen rapidly, by the time 2012 rolls around, you're going to have an out-of-control gasoline price for which you have no response if you don't drill. He said, but we're going to do biofuels. I said, well, Senator, I'm heavily involved in biofuels, and I'm working as hard as I can, but you can't push a rope. And I'm afraid that between now and 2012, if you're counting on biofuels to affect the price of gasoline, you're going to be very disappointed because I can't see how anyone could produce the volume of biofuels that would make a difference on the gas price between now and 2012, not even a penny. And he said, you're not listening to me. We're doing biofuels. Turned on his heel and walked away. Well, I'm not shy. I walked with him. And he's waving at me, go away, go away. And I said, Senator, this needs a longer conversation, please. I'm trying to help, not hurt. And then he yelled at one of his staffers, talk to him. And he jumped in the car and drove away. For the rest of the campaign, it was all about nasty big oil and what he would do to big oil in terms of raising taxes. And what we've seen in the first 3 years of the presidency is really an anti-hydrocarbon, anti-oil and natural gas agenda until January 2012. In January 2012, as the gas prices rapidly rising, as the crude oil price rapidly rising, having really said nothing constructive or positive other than a brief mention of natural gas in October of 2011, first time in a speech he made reference to natural gas as a fuel of the future. Suddenly we have an all-in, all-the-above energy strategy. And that was what was announced at the January State of the Union address. But it didn't help. Those of you who bought fuel in the last 6 months, it didn't help because it's words, and the words are too late. And I'm not campaigning for or against him or his opponent. Because if we look back over the history of this dilemma that we face, what did George W. Bush do during his tenure as president? Finally, in July of 2008, whether you're a fan of George Bush or not, I talk as I see it. July of 2008, for the first time in George W. Bush's presidency, he said, standing next to John McCain, as the gasoline price in 2008 reached over $4 a gallon average to the consumer across the nation, as we hit the $147 mark on the crude oil price per barrel, he finally said publicly, we need more access. These companies need more access to more oil, and we'll work on that. Well, in July of 2008, I'm sorry to say, the previous president had no political credibility left to work with Congress to try to do something about access in the last 6 months of his presidency. Where'd he been for 7.5 years? Because this problem didn't happen overnight. And what's driving it, which you know full well, as participants in the industry, global demand keeps rising. And what many people fail to comprehend or understand or know or care about is that at the production level of some 88 million barrels a day, to sustain that production level in the face of 6 to 8% declines every year in existing reservoirs, we need between 5 and 7 to 8 new million barrels per day just to stay even. And when China goes from 5 million barrels a day consumption in 2005 to 10 million barrels a day consumption in 2011, and is projected to be in 2015 is projected to need 15 million barrels a day, that's just one country needing another 5 million between now and 2015. Where's it coming from? The world's been stuck at 88 million for about the last 4 years. And India and its growth is looking at going from 4 million barrels a day consumption today to 7 million barrels a day consumption by 2015. 3 plus 5 equals 8. Where's that additional 8 coming from in the face of continuing declines? The answer is nobody knows. And here we live in a country with the benefit of more oil and natural gas than we will ever need, ever consume, because for as much as we produce, we're also innovative. We also love new technology and innovation. And 30, 40 years from now, I predict that the demand for oil in this country will decrease, not increase, because we will largely substitute in our transportation fuels world a different power source for our vehicles. And I'll come on to that a little later. But here we are, 3 years in a row, 14 million people unemployed. Don't they matter anymore? Have we just adopted the fact that we're going to live with 8+% unemployment? I don't know about you, but I really do worry about those people. As it was said, I'm the chairman of the National Urban League. The National Urban League is a national organization that takes care of the neediest people in social services and other mundane needs in 102 American cities. And they're struggling. They take on all comers from every ethnic background, from African American to Asian to Anglo. And the diversity of the people we are serving in the National Urban League grows by the year. Because this horror of unemployment doesn't distinguish ethnicity. It affects everyone. And here we are in a country that with leadership and management of our energy future could start a whole new world of prosperity. A whole new period in this country's history in which we would repeat or exceed what we did in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And here's how we started off. Let's take a very simple formula to deal once and for all with this nagging issue of transportation fuels and the affordability of transportation fuels, looking at the energy we know we have. I'll offer a 5-point plan that would, by 2022, if we started now, end forever U.S. concern about oil supplies from outside North America. End forever. Straits of Hormuz, not our problem. Problems with Russia, not our problem. Problems with Chavez down in Venezuela, not our problem. Somebody else's problem for a change. Because we will do for ourselves what we could have been doing for ourselves for decades had we had the leadership and the political will to do it. It starts with a very simple decision to set a national target to produce 10 million barrels a day of oil. We know how to do that. We used to produce 10 million barrels a day in the 70s and the 80s. But then it became more difficult to get access, more difficult to get permits, and so companies just said, we'll go elsewhere. This is too hard. And our daily production slipped to 5 million barrels a day. Half. 5 million barrels a day by 2007, 2008. Thanks to the technology called hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, we began turning that around. And between 2007 and 2008 to today, we're all the way back to just over 6 million barrels a day. 1 million barrels a day is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of production, that's a lot of work. But let's be clear. We know where the oil is. We know how much we have. What would stop us from going back to 10 million barrels a day? Over a 40% improvement in oil production from today, and if we were determined to make it happen, it could happen in the next decade. Not, as the Wall Street Journal said yesterday, by 2035. Who wants to wait another 23 years, putting up with all of the issues globally over the next 23 years, as we would try to increase production according to the way the EIA describes it? When we had the leadership decision to make it possible, we start on a journey to 10. Number two, with all the natural gas that we have, our failure to turn natural gas into a transportation fuel is foolishness. We're allowed to be foolish, but it's embarrassing to be foolish. When we have all this natural gas, Boone Pickens has been talking about his Pickens plan for 4 years now. 4 years and not a single step forward in this nation, other than at the state level, nothing at the federal level, to help make that Pickens plan become reality, which focuses on trucking. Use compressed natural gas for trucking, particularly evolving the industry so that new trucks, not with the expense of converting existing trucks, but new trucks come on the road while an infrastructure is built, so that they're compatible, they're parallel. And over the next decade, we could eliminate 2 million barrels a day of imports in this country by substituting compressed natural gas for trucking instead of diesel. And just to put this in perspective, at a full employment economy, you know what we were using in 2008? We were using 20 million barrels a day, producing 5. 20 million barrels a day at full employment is where we would go right back to if we had full employment. We're down to about 18 million barrels a day today. That's still a lot when you're only producing 6. But get rid of 2 million barrels a day of imports with compressed natural gas. Get rid of 3 to 4 million barrels a day of imports by taking more of that natural gas and converting it into methanol. Very simple process. We do it every day in this country. Let's expand on that. And with flex fuel engines and vehicles, such that new vehicles coming out of Detroit or wherever they're built, whatever's built or sold in this country, were at a flex fuel engine, it could accept a diluted gasoline with methanol, up to 85, even 100% methanol. And the industry knows how to do that. both the oil and gas industry knows how to make the methanol, and Detroit knows how to make flex fuel vehicles. 100% of the vehicles in Brazil, flex fuel. China, flex fuel. US, 15% flex fuel. We could do this. And with that natural gas, so I already mentioned we could increase oil production by 4 million barrels a day. 40+ % increase from today. I'm talking about 30 additional BCF per day of natural gas. 18 BCF to make methanol, 12 BCF for compressed natural gas. You in the industry know what a BCF is, billion cubic feet of gas per day, converted into transportation fuel. The first three parts of the plan were at 15 million barrels a day equivalent domestic production of fuel for transportation. We have 5 million more to go. 2 million to be in a full employment economy. 2 million barrels of imports would be saved by increased efficiency in vehicles, which we're on the path to do, fortunately. So we reduce demand by 2 million barrels a day through increased efficiency in the kinds of automobiles we're buying and using. And that includes hybrids and plug-in hybrids and higher mileage efficiency in internal combustion engines, plus a few battery vehicles thrown in. On top of that, if we need additional imported oil, because we're at the 17 or 18 level, our economy has recovered sufficiently that we need more. We've got a neighbor to the north and a neighbor to the south with abundant resources who we are partners with under the North America Free Trade Agreement. And there's the rest of our supply for domestic fuel. Canada, Mexico, and the US working in cooperation for that additional 2 to 3 million barrels a day. And we do not need a single gallon of crude oil from anywhere but Mexico and Canada and ourselves to meet our fuel needs going forward. And then as we think about the long-term future, we have the technology and innovation coming out of universities, out of industry, to convert all of our vehicles in the 2030s, 2040s, and 2050s, convert all of our vehicles to non-internal combustion engine vehicles. If you like batteries, you'll have plenty of battery choices. If you like hydrogen fuel cell, you'll have hydrogen fuel cell choices. Japan and Germany are on a tear on hydrogen fuel cell vehicles because neither Japan nor Germany wants to be victimized on a sustained basis by the continued rise in the crude oil price, starving their nation's consumers of the disposable income it takes to fuel their vehicles in the way in which we're fueling our vehicles. So they're basically saying to the OPEC and oil and gas industry more broadly, thank you, we've had enough. We're going for hydrogen fuel cells, we're going for batteries, we're going for public mass transportation. Have a good day. And so they're on a tear. The US was put on that path by George W. Bush, in all fairness to the president, in 2002, when in his State of the Union address, he said a child born today, by the time they would purchase their first vehicle at age 18 or later, they will have a choice of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle or an internal combustion vehicle if we commit ourselves to this path. And he said, then we shall. And to his credit, he stuck with that program through the balance of his presidency until we changed presidents and the new administration took an anything but Bush approach, and the Secretary of Energy, in 6 weeks on the job, canceled, zeroed the budget for hydrogen fuel cell for mobility purposes until Congress reinstated it. So there's a short plan, ladies and gentlemen, to deliver domestic affordable fuels. And oh, by the way, to really achieve that in the time frame that I've described, you know what the capital spending requirements would be? Looking at the capital spend for the drilling, 4 million barrels a day, additional. 30 BCF of natural gas. We today produce 60 BCF. We have to go to 90 BCF. Any of you in the supply chain, think about what your companies would have to do to get to 90 BCF and 10 million barrels a day. You'd need a whole lot more supply chain cohorts to get that job done. And everything going back to the steel mill, going back to the iron ore mines, going back to all the raw materials that would be necessary, but also the millions and millions of people who would be put to work to, in a sense, raise the capacity of the industry by 50%. We're looking at upwards of $1 trillion a year of capital investment over the next 10 years. And do the math of that with the economic approach. What is our GDP? $14 trillion. Add $1 trillion of capital spending to a $14 trillion GDP. You're numerate. You know how to get the answer to that. You're looking at 7+% economic growth in this country. When is the last time we had 7% economic growth? It's hard to remember. It's been so long. We're used to China having 8, 9, 10%. We plod along at 3%. Till the oil price rises, and then we drop to 2% or less. Or even go into recession. This $1 trillion infusion of not one penny of taxpayer money to make this happen, because there's a return on investment on 10 million barrels production a day. There's a return on investment of 90 BCF that shareholders are more than happy to pay for, and there's no shortage of money in this economy. There's so much money sitting on the sidelines with nothing worthwhile to invest in. How's your interest rate at your local bank? You may as well put the money in your mattress for all it's going to earn you. And so the whole notion here, energy affordability, economic growth, job growth, the demand on the education institutions would be incredible to turn out the graduates that would supply the people requirements, whether it's skilled trades, schools, turning out people that know what they're doing with their hands and their minds, to the engineers, the scientists, the physicists, the managers, the leaders. Imagine a 50% improvement in the population of people who know what they're doing in the energy industry. And I've said all of this without mentioning power generation. Power generation is a whole nother opportunity that we don't have time tonight to go into, but just take these facts down as facts. We have 600 coal plants in this country, average age over 40 years old. Design life, 40 years. We're living on borrowed time on old coal plants. We have 104 nuclear reactors in this country. Average age over 30 years old, design life 40 years. How many new nuclear plants are being built to replace those aging nuclear reactors? 2 are in the permitting stage. But don't go look at the site where they're going to be built, because you'll just see a forest. In other words, we haven't broken ground. And the nuclear reactors instead are being licensed for another 20 years. So a design life of 40, but the NRC has agreed to extend by 20. So if you're worried about reliability and risk with a 40-year-old reactor, how'd you like to come up alongside a 60-year-old reactor and manage that risk? We are building some gas plants because gas is available. But even with building the gas plants, look at the price of gas. Half of the gas drilling rigs in the last year have shut down. They've been replaced by liquid rigs, but half of the drilling rigs for natural gas have gone away because the price is too low. We need a new market for that natural gas. But in the power generation area, we can also do wind and solar and hydropower. Why not? If it makes sense, do it. If it works, do it. Now, they're very immature in their technologies, but they will mature with time. Solar's efficiency in the single digits is now getting up to the double digits. We could get it to 30 to 40% with nanotechnology in the next 20 or 30 years. So don't write off solar. Don't write off wind. They can add to the power base. But that's a whole nother $1 trillion a year opportunity. If we address the power generation needs of this country, lest we get into the third world experience of blackouts because we have an unreliable grid. What are people predicting this summer for Texas electricity supply? Blackouts. There's a real risk this summer. And we know what heat is like this week. That we may not have the reliability of the grid because we haven't built enough power plants in a state where the population is growing significantly year over year. So we have an opportunity here, ladies and gentlemen, to transform this country's economy, its energy system, and its employment record like we haven't had in decades and decades. And why won't it happen? There are 3 reasons why it won't happen. Unless something else happens. And I'll get to that in a moment. But why it won't happen in the short term, why it's not happening now, there are 3 explanations. 1, we are so infected with partisan perversity in this country that our representatives can't talk to each other. The hostility on Capitol Hill is unprecedented, at least in the last 50, 60 years. And it is reported as such. And it is all about power. It is all about who has it and who doesn't. And it's all about who's going to do what to either regain power, gain power, or keep power. And the games that are played, and the shenanigans that are pulled, and the hostility and the rhetoric and the behavior are obscene. In a democratic republic where we count on these people that we send to office to do our work, not their work, our work. And that perversity of partisanship is like leukemia in the system, where it can't be cured. It has to be replaced. We need transplant, we need blood implants, blood transfusions. The second problem is we have elected a political class. Their time dimension, the definition of time, is the time between now and the next election. Not the next 10 years. They might not be here 10 years from now to enjoy the fruits of all that $1 trillion a year investment. So why worry about that? I got to worry about how I get reelected. And whether that's a 2-year cycle, declining by the month, now it's a 5-month cycle. All that matters is what happens between now and November. And whatever needs to be done to ensure my electoral success, I will do. And don't talk to me about this long-term stuff. I don't have time for long-term stuff. Energy time directly conflicts with political time. And as long as we tolerate the political time behavior of these folks, we get what we get, which is essentially nothing in the energy space. In fact, the 2011 year came to an end. In the 111th Congress, not one page of energy legislation was passed. I'm sorry, as 2011 began, as 2010 came to an end. So the 111th Congress, with a Democratic majority in the Senate, a Democratic majority in the House, and having the White House, produced not one page of legislation that affects the energy future of this nation. The 112th Congress is currently in session from 2011 to today. Thus far, not one page of energy legislation has exited the Congress to go to the White House for a signature, not one page. And the chances of an energy bill between now and November are 0, from my point of view. So that's 4 years running, not one page of energy legislation, because the political time priorities don't allow it to happen. And the third problem is, while we have been busy in our lives doing the things that are important to us, we probably haven't had a close enough eye on Washington, D.C. Because in the executive branch, surprise, surprise, 13 cabinet-level agencies govern energy. 13. If you think you're going to get relief in the legislative branch, you got to deal with 26 different committees and subcommittees. 26 between the House and the Senate. And if you think, well, I'll solve my problems in court, 800 federal judges serving for life decide energy policy from their bench when a case is brought to their bench, whether they know anything about energy or not. They have the authority from the bench to decide cases which establish national policy. And that's just the federal government. There are also 50 governors and 50 state legislatures and 50 state court systems and thousands and tens of thousands of municipalities and counties across the country which also govern and regulate energy. So if anybody thinks that it's an easy path, if any of you are free marketers who said, let the free market decide, there ain't no free market for energy. Not with 13 cabinet agencies looking after it, and 26 federal congressional committees, and 800 federal judges, and all these governors and state legislatures and so on. The only free market that's left in the energy space, ladies and gentlemen, and thank goodness this is still left, you get to turn right or left into the gas station of your choice. That's it. What you purchase in that gas station has been fully regulated from the idea of drilling, all the way through the production process, all the way through the delivery process, right up to the very pump that you're getting your gasoline from. It's all regulated. And so with this complexity and size of government, getting something done is not easy. So I founded Citizens for Affordable Energy for a simple reason: to bring this story to the people that matter in this country. And the people that really matter in this country are you. And I'd much rather be here than watching the circus at the Supreme Court, even though I enjoy the circus. And with 2 political science degrees, I love that circus. But I'm here because I want to share this with you. We are a nation on the verge of the greatest period of prosperity that we could ever imagine in the subsequent to the post-war build-out of this nation, with the world's oldest energy system, aging by the year, needing all the attention we could possibly give it, in a country that by 2040 won't have 320 million people. We're going to have 400 million people in this country by 2040. That's a pretty big increase. And who doesn't want to live in this country? Very few. And so a 400 million person population will be living off an energy system that was designed for 200 million people. No wonder energy executives talk about blackouts and gas lines. Because they can see it coming. Given the lack of investment, given the lack of attention to the growth prospects, given the need for new and more and better. So what are we going to do? Well, Citizens for Affordable Energy stands for 2 things. 1, information sharing. Sound information, depoliticized. These are not talking points from the Democratic Party. These are not talking points from the Republican Party. These are facts, ladies and gentlemen. You can go to my website, citizensforaffordableenergy.org, and all you see is facts. Because facts are all that matter here. You can get to various political sites from that website as well as if you choose. Or you go to academic sites. We're very inclusive in how we try to link up with the world of knowledge, the world of information that's out there. I don't think that there's any industry in this country that has an advantage over the energy industry when it comes to intelligence and science and putting it all together. I spent years in the aerospace industry, and I would equate the aerospace industry and the energy industry as the 2 industries that deal with the greatest complexity the human mind has ever encountered. Successfully. And so the information and knowledge. Somebody said to me, well, you're an energy person, you spend all your time on this, how do you expect me to understand it? This was a student at UT who said, how in the world can you get grassroots people to understand energy? They don't take the time, they don't have the know-how, they don't have the awareness. I said, it's just like nutrition. How much do you really need to know about nutrition not to kill yourself through your mouth? It doesn't take that much knowledge not to kill yourself by what you eat. And to nurture your body, because your body reacts in ways that are positive or negative. I know, because I eat a lot. And your body responds to the nutrition. Energy is the nutrition of the economy. How difficult is it to understand that without electrons and without BTUs and liquid fuels, we don't go anywhere, we don't do anything. We live in caves. We light torches. We try to invent candles. But we don't have laptops. We don't have iPhones. And we don't have kitchen appliances. And we don't have televisions without electrons. And those transportation fuels are vital in a society like ours, which treasures the freedom to move about. The second aspect of once we have information, and I consider the target audience 320 million people, all of whom matter, all of whom benefit. Once we have information, then we get action. It is critical to activate one's citizenship. What that means is vote. What that means is pay attention. What that means is ask the politicians what they will do for you, because that's their job. They work for you, not the other way around, and we tend to forget that. Remember who's boss here. It's not them. It's we who send them, who have the authority and the entitlement to decide who we send. And I'm saddened when so many people don't go to the polls, because you get what you get, and what we're getting is not good enough. In the city of Houston, we have a mayor who was elected with less than 14% voter turnout. In her first election, and I have great regard for Anise Parker, in her first election, she won just a little bit over 50% of the vote for her first term as mayor, which means just over 7% of the electorate of Houston chose the mayor. Now, the mayor is a very important person. Bill White was a good one. Anise is very conscientious and very committed. We're fortunate. But when 7% of the population shows up to choose somebody in such a critical position, you ask yourself, what's going on here? Has democracy fallen on its face? At the national level, some of you are probably aware that there's a national election coming this fall. Some of you, if you listen to KTRH radio in this town, which is starts with the Michael Berry show in the morning, then switches you over to Glenn Beck, and then over to Rush Limbaugh, and then over to Sean Hannity, and then back to Michael Berry, and then on to Michael Levin. If you listen to 12, 14 hours of talk radio on that station, your blood's boiling by the end of every day. Either side that listens to them, their blood is going to boil. Because if you believe in what the speakers are saying, your blood has to boil because you're so frustrated at what's not happening. And if you're on the other side, you're listening to them and your blood's boiling because you can't stand this nonsense that they're preaching at you. Or you can go on MSNBC or go on Connect TV. And you can hear the other point of view. We have this opportunity to activate our citizenship with good information. We need to take it. But there's one more reform that has to happen. You may disagree with me, but I gotta put it out there. I submit to you that our government, when it comes to energy and the environment, is broken, dysfunctional, and unfixable in its current form. How depressing is that? Broken, dysfunctional, and unfixable in its current form. So what form would it take to become functional, and as you know so well from process management, efficient and effective, meaning not broken? Efficiency, effectiveness, functional, and working. Wow. Boy, what a dream world that is. John, there you go, boiling the ocean again. When will you ever learn? There is a reform that could be done, which has precedent in this country and which works. It works every day. Not perfectly, but almost. The functional form that works in a democracy is the functional form called an independent regulatory agency. We have an independent regulatory agency that works every day to make sure that our monetary system is viable. As I said, they make mistakes. And they've made some mistakes on interest rates, they've made some mistakes on money availability, money supply. They've made some mistakes on the open market window, price of money, but I'm talking about the Federal Reserve. How many people know that this nation in the 18th and 19th centuries, by not making a decision on whether we would or would not have a central bank as part of our national governmental structure, and instead rely upon state banks, how many people know the history of that, which in 1907 led to the default of the US monetary system and to the inability of the monetary system to function, so that bills could not be paid? The nation was essentially non-operational financially. The monetary system had broken down completely in 1907. It was refloated by a loan from Wall Street bankers. J.P. Morgan himself, along with his fellow bankers, floated a loan of enough money to the federal government to restart the monetary system, which is a system based on trust, but it has to be built on something which is called money, a reserve of money. So the loan was a reserve of money on which the monetary system could be refloated. The promise from the politicians to the J.P. Morgan crowd and his friends was, we won't let this happen again. Except it did in 1912. This nation's monetary system defaulted twice in the first 12 years of this 20th century, until 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, and Woodrow Wilson signed it, and we created the Board of Governors who manage the monetary system regardless of who runs Congress, regardless of who's in the White House. It's an independent board with statutory authorities that they don't have to check with the president, don't have to talk to Congress. They just operate solely authoritatively, statutorily, on the basis of what's right for the American economy. And what's right for the American economy is economic growth and job creation. Those are the two parameters that they have to meet. Job creation and economic growth. That's what they're measured against. That's what they're there to do. And they're using the monetary system to try to achieve that. Now, some would blame them for the 2008 meltdown. Well, there's a lot of other guilty parties in the 2008 meltdown, including the Federal Reserve had too much money in the system. They should have pulled back. Greenspan got a little full of himself and let money fly. Well, there was too much money, and it led to too many mortgages that didn't make sense. And then we had the housing collapse. But the independent regulatory agency was able to work outside of Congress, outside of the White House, to help the nation recover from that default, and it's still working. They made the mistake in the 1930s of too tight a money supply. They learned that lesson. Ben Bernanke happens to be a student of that period. It's a democratic organization in the sense that they operate under law passed by Congress. The governors are appointed by the president with advice and consent of the Senate. And the chairman is appointed only for 4-year terms and can only be reappointed by the president with advice and consent of the Senate. So there is a democratic check and balance over the makeup of the independent regulatory agency, and that will continue. What happened with Dodd-Frank? After all of this collapse in 2008, Dodd-Frank, the big reform of the financial system, actually gave the Federal Reserve more authority, not less, Ron Paul notwithstanding. Ron Paul's not a fan of the Federal Reserve, in case you aren't aware of that. He's quite outspoken in his attack on the Federal Reserve, as I try to be on my defense of the Federal Reserve. We need the equivalent kind of agency, ladies and gentlemen, to reform our energy future. It cannot be done by a president. If George W. Bush and Barack Obama can't do it with all their skills, capabilities, and intelligence, if George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton couldn't do it, if Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter couldn't do it, if Gerald Ford and Richard Nixon couldn't do it, that's 8 presidents in a row that have promised energy independence to this country. And we're more dependent now than when Nixon was president. I don't call that success. And 20 Congresses in 40 years are complicit in failing to deliver. So don't count on Congress, don't count on the president. Count on us. Count on we the people. Because that's the only solution. And that reform can only happen if we're behind it. And understand it and demand it. They won't do it on their own. I'm known as Mr. DOA on K Street. They don't like me in DC. I go there a lot and keep going. But I'm Mr. DOA, it means dead on arrival. Because K Street doesn't want to hear it. Most of the major oil companies don't want to hear it. None of the members of Congress want to hear it except a few. And very few elected officials or appointed officials in the executive branch want to hear it because it takes away their authority. It denies them the power that they have today. And I say, well, how well are you doing with the power you have today? How's the gas price, Mr. Congressman? How's the gasoline price? How's the economy doing, by the way, Mr. President? They're flailing and failing for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So the reform, the structural reform, to create an independent regulatory agency to do 4 things. This is all they have to do. Operating at the super macro level, looking out over the world's largest economy, looking out over the world's oldest democracy, here's what they need to do. 1, address the supply side requirements going forward. Let's call it 50-year requirement. Break it down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. We all know in the energy industry, short-term is 10 years or less. Medium-term, 10 to 25. Long-term, 25 to 50. We're used to that. The industry operates in those dimensions. We know over the next 0 to 10 years exactly where we're going to be 10 years out, provided we get the government enablers that we need, or we're not going to deliver what we could. So how much energy from what source as we look out over the next 50 years? How much hydrocarbon, how much nuclear, how much renewable, how much hydropower, and on and on. Second, how much efficiency can we achieve through technology? By improving efficiency, we have more energy over time with less demand. The example would be the elimination of the internal combustion engine and replacing it with fuel cells. Third, we need for the environmental regulatory body to be governed by the independent regulatory agency, not the politics of the White House. And our land, our water, and our air, and its protections, and its improvements should be compatible with the energy system. Not adversarial to the energy system, compatible with the energy system over a 50-year outlook. And fourth, we gotta have infrastructure. If we don't have infrastructure, we don't have energy. And that infrastructure has to be where it needs to be. We don't have wireless electricity. I don't know if we ever will. I wouldn't rule it out, but we don't have it now. We need wires, we need pipelines, we need tanks, we need pumps, we need hardware. And yes, it's ugly. And yes, it's carrying dangerous product. And yes, there are risks associated with it. But if you want to read at night, if you want to watch TV, if you want to go see your family, if you want to do what we do as Americans, you need energy. And so you need infrastructure. Those 4 areas of strategic positioning at an independent regulatory agency level, I believe, is the reform that would matter as we look ahead in this country. So ladies and gentlemen, the task is ours. It doesn't belong to anybody else. Don't look to President Obama, don't look to candidate Romney. They're not going to fix it. Don't call up your local congressman to say, you know, fix this. Under the current structure, it won't happen. Instead, call up your congressman and say, we got to change the structure. If you want my vote, you're going to have to come talk to me about how we're going to change the structure for what's good for me and my family and my children and their children. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the threat of it getting worse is greater under today's environment, political environment, than the chances of it getting better. And how long can we stay in this rut of self-induced recession, self-induced lack of economic growth by virtue of our own unwillingness to activate our citizenship with the information that we have, which can change the future? But I have great confidence that we will do it, because the last four letters of who we are really do matter. And the last four letters, when you're an American, is all it takes. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. I'm more than happy to take questions, comments. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, John, for your passion and for your activity in the political arena. So, would you actually have this regulatory body mandate a differential price between diesel fuel and natural gas?
No.
Okay, so as a trucker, you threw a lot of math out to the audience, so help me here. I mean, and you've already looked at the problem. I haven't. I just look at driving so many miles a year, paying so much for diesel fuel, and I see today that I can buy natural gas at roughly $1 a gallon cheaper, but I have to make an investment of about $30,000 for a new engine, or, you know, my truck cost would be $30,000 incremental, and I have to invest another $30,000 in my fuel dispensing system. So how am I supposed to recoup that $60,000?
I think it's, you know, because the price ultimately is a global supply-demand issue. The reality is, if you don't make the conversion, you'll be out of business depending upon diesel, because the price of diesel is only going to go north. With any kind of economic growth, the price of diesel becomes completely unmanageable. So what today looks like $1 a gallon difference will shortly be a $2 or $3 or $4 gallon difference, given the availability of natural gas. And so if you do the math on the $3 or $4 a gallon difference, suddenly that $30,000 delta in the new style truck becomes more affordable, and the payback is much shorter. And so I think the profitability doesn't really happen in the first year, but it's a decision that more and more people would make as they think about their capital spending. Because otherwise, it's not just the cost of the fuel. I think the real crunch is going to come on the availability of the fuel. Because if you're not driving the vehicle, you're not doing anything other than sitting there, watching the vehicle sit there and bake in the sun. But I'm not trying to be facetious here, but I'm very worried about shortages of hydrocarbon fuel if we don't do something domestically that's very dramatic. The reason is the demand from the rest of the world is only going up. The supply is not going to keep up with the demand. The price is going to rise. The economies will suffer from that. And those who are the leaders in dealing with this issue, I think, will win in the end. Anyone else? Yes, way in the back.
I worked with Dr. Grossman on a book he wrote, the U.S. Energy Policy and the Pursuit of Failure. It's kind of the same problem, totally different approach, but I think very similar question to me. Going back to your nutrition metaphor, that the energy policy, or energy is kind of the nutrition of our economy here. We may know what causes our problems, but at what point will we react to it? It's like a person that eats cake may gain 5 pounds every couple months, but when will it get to a point where we're going to react? More so than just understanding there's a problem, where it can actually get to a reactive state.
It's a critically important question, which will affect different people differently in terms of their answer and their response. Because some people watch their weight very closely, and you're right, others don't. When it hits us all simultaneously, that's when we have the best shot at a mass movement of change. And those of us in the room who can remember the gas lines of 1974, or the gas lines of 1978, the utter frustration, the confusion, the chaos associated with gas lines, or people who have been subject to a series of consistent blackouts. So when the shortages are there, and some people may say, look, you're just flailing at windmills here, there ain't going to be shortages. How do we know that? We got the oldest energy system in the world. We're up against formidable economic powerhouses that we've never known before in our economic history. Yes, Europe may be faltering, but Europe's not done. But against the powerhouses of India, of China, of the rest of the developing world, of the BRIC nations, the world's redefining itself. The issue is whether we will redefine ourselves in our own interest, or just be victimized by lethargy, or lack of interest, or lack of attention. But when the gas lines come and the blackouts happen, that's the galvanizing catalyst, I guess, that I think would finally push us to where we need to go.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You had talked about the abundance of natural gas, and I was wondering why did we go toward more of a battery or electricity, and then more of a fuel versus on natural gas vehicles?
There was official view held by the industry and held by the government at the Energy Information Agency as recently as 2005 and 6 that the nation didn't have enough natural gas to sustain its current consumption more than about 10 years. And those of you who did any work on this, when I first became president of Shell Oil Company in 2005, I inherited 5 LNG terminal projects, just in Shell. We had plans to build 5 LNG regasification terminals in the United States. 3 along the Gulf of Mexico and 2 on the East Coast. Because of the fear in the system that we needed more natural gas and we'd have to use LNG. The way Europe is currently using LNG, or Korea or Japan. That was only 2005, 2006. It wasn't until the industry coalesced around the technologies of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling and the opening up of the Barnett Shale that really taught us we got nothing to worry about when it comes to natural gas. So that began in sort of 2007, 2008. So it's only recent history. It's that recent. And so and now everybody talks about it like we've known it for a long time. We've known the resource was there, we didn't know how to get it. So it's the new technology that enables us to get it. And there are those that work busily today trying to shut down the technology. You can be sure. Try to frack a well in New York State. You'll be arrested. You know, communities are determining at their city council level, no fracking here, no thank you. They don't understand, and the industry has a job to do to explain the benefits, the economic benefits, and the risk management processes which enable that to occur. And so I do think that it's that recent that it was only when Boone came out, Boone Pickens, I talked to him periodically, and he's frustrated as could be at how slow it's taking for compressed natural gas to be seen as a viable alternative. And there is a big inhibition, and the first questioner was absolutely right. The infrastructure is not there today, and the costs are prohibitive today to make a commitment to the conversion without some kind of a tax rebate or some kind of a, financial support from the government to incentivize people to do something. But the Congress has successively said in the last 4 years, we're not going to subsidize truckers for natural gas vehicles. That's a policy position by not passing any legislation. And so that's why I think we'll ultimately do it, but it'll be because the economics will enable it to be done with private money. Maybe there'll be a public incentive, but it would accelerate it with a public incentive. But, so I hope that addresses the question. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
What's being done now to support domestic drilling within the United States? And is there any issues with the drilling for the fracturing of the gas areas that create hazards for the population?
There are well-known geographic basins now where states have a better understanding of what exists within their states. So you have the Marcellus Formation in New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, the Utica Shale in Ohio, the Haynesville Shale in Arkansas, Barnett in Texas, Eagle Ford in Texas, Bakken in North Dakota, and there's a whole other formation in Colorado, the Niobrara, I think it's called. So there is a much better understanding in the states that these formations exist. And what the states have been enabling companies to do is approach landholders to get mineral rights signed over or paid for by the companies from the landholders. Because in this country, the landholder owns the mineral rights in most states, I think every state. And then they're able to get state permits to operate. So because we have state permits on private lands, and the federal government has nothing to do with it, they're not in the way. So we've made huge progress in North Dakota, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio. New York has said no thus far to fracking. There are other parts of the country that are evaluating their position. Vermont has said no. Well, who cares? They don't have any formation. And so we're making progress locally. But I got to tell you, as an industry, person from the industry, it's bits and pieces. There's huge volumes to be had, but it's incremental. And when you have the federal government doing what it's doing, so the federal government shut down the Gulf of Mexico 2 years ago. Gulf of Mexico is down in oil production by over 200,000 barrels a day, and it's about half the natural gas production it was 2 years ago. So while we've made incremental progress in Texas and Oklahoma and North Dakota and Pennsylvania, we've had a setback in the Gulf of Mexico. Obama administration to date, drilling on federal permits to drill on federal lands are down 40%. So federal land drilling is way down. So for everything we do to move forward, we're also moving backward. And that's the politics of this particular administration, who are putting new rules on top of state rules on federal lands in states where the federal government has federal land. So you have a state set of authorities on natural gas fracking and what needs to be done. We're waiting any day now for the Department of the Interior to announce its rules for fracking. And the Secretary of the Interior has said, we don't rely on the states. Some of them are okay, but many of them aren't. Even though they're fracking today. And even though the residents of those states are quite happy with the process of fracking. Fracking is a completely manageable process, and I'm in full favor of best-in-class standards being the regulations. And if producers can't meet the best-in-class standards, pull their license. Because the citizens of this country deserve the production process to be best-in-class. There's no excuse for it not to be best-in-class. And when you have operators that are sloppy, when you have operators that cut corners, when you have operators that don't care about the local consequences of not doing a good cement job, not doing a proper drilling engineering job, not treating the wastewater management according to best-in-class treatment standards, I don't think they deserve to be in business in that state. And I think most of the industry feels that way. But yet, there are people who do cheat, who work around the regulations, and who tolerate misbehavior at the drill site, and that should be intolerable. The whole industry suffers when that happens. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.